Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is 1 year old, and just saying that aloud feels surreal. Not just because another whole year has gone by in the blink of an eye, but because it's just hitting me that Xenoblade 3 has been a part of my life for that long, when it feels like I only just got my hands on it yesterday. I can remember watching that reveal trailer with my friend in our college dorm that fateful February, how I froze suddenly upon realising that what I was looking at was a brand new Xenoblade game. By that point, my love for the series had been completely solidified, with Xenoblade 2 in particular ranking as my favourite game I've ever played up to that point. So needless to say, I was overwhelmed with hype. I was so excited I put out a thematic prediction a week after that trailer dropped. It was the fastest I'd ever managed to make a video from conception to publishing, and any time I found the game somewhat fading from my mind, another new trailer would drop and my excitement would renew once more. But to be honest, I really wasn't sure what I was going to get. As I've been saying constantly, I was looking forward to it, but I couldn't deny a slight apprehension. After all, this game was billing itself as the conclusion to the overarching storyline set up by the previous two games. Would it have the space to do all that while still being a great standalone game? Would its characters measure up to their predecessors without being elbowed out the way? They certainly did in terms of fashion. I'll defend the character designs of 2 till I die, but I gotta admit, this aesthetic is way more up my alley. Kind of reminded me of the more overtly sci-fi vibe of Xenoblade X. And hey, some genuine melanin on the table, that's always a plus. But though these characters looked good and their world intriguing, how would their actual substance be? In the end, I resolved not to think about it too hard. I didn't come up with any theories or even any real expectations. I resolved to just open the game and play it on its own terms, taking it and judging it as I experienced it, not before. And finally, on the 29th of July, 2022, 2 months before its original release date, I held Xenoblade Chronicles 3 in my hands. It couldn't have come at a better time. I was in the middle of the summer holiday with nearly 2 months before I started my final year at uni, plus my younger brother was staying at his friend's house for a week, meaning there was no one and nothing to stop me from playing that game all I wanted. And let me tell you, when I say I played that game like it was my job, I am not exaggerating. A typical day during this time period would go like this: wake up, breakfast, play Xenoblade for 7 hours straight, have lunch, play another 7 hours, have dinner, play again until like 3 in the morning, and then go to bed in order to do the whole thing the next day. Somewhere during that time, I would make sure to go out and take a long walk to get fresh air and give my eyes a rest, but literally nearly every hour of the day, Xenoblade was on my mind. I played it so much that I began having dreams of me travelling with the characters. I was absorbed into the world and characters of Ionios, and what a world it was. Since this video is mostly for me, I'm not going to bother with giving much recap or context, so be warned, you will likely be confused if you haven't played Xenoblade 3. From the moment I started playing, rarely a moment went by that I wasn't enjoying the journey. The game's premise and characters immediately hooked me, starting off with Noah, Uni, Lanz, and Riku, but after the first hour or so expanding to include Mio, Taion, Senna, and Manana. Playing as these characters, former enemies, now fellow renegades with only each other to count on, it was one of the most pleasant experiences of my life. I cannot understate the vice grip these lines of code had my heart in. The world that they're in and the choices they have to make are so bleak, and they've all suffered so much. But they're all also dumb, silly teenagers given the space to be dumb, silly teenagers for the first time, and it's so charming. It reminds me a lot of the first half of Steins Gate, where a lot of the appeal, for me at least, was watching these idiot friends my age just be adorably stupid together. Making all of them the same age and having all of them be together at the start of the game was a fantastic decision, and it gave me ample time to get to know them and their interpersonal relationships. Noah was the one I admit I was the most worried about. I was hoping we wouldn't end up with just a blander Shulk, but he ended up being an incredibly fascinating character. In the hopeless world of Ionios, Noah, despite his generally subdued demeanour, feels like this almost blinding ray of light just because of how earnest he is in his want to change things for the better. How clearly uncomfortable he is with having to hurt people, how deeply and carefully he thinks about things. At the same time, you also kind of get the sense that he's like 3 or 5 minutes away from just cracking completely. The weight of the world is heavy on his shoulders, and though he keeps it together well enough, everything is clearly getting to him. Noah really gives me the vibes of a philosopher. I get the sense he's the kind of person who thinks 5 words for every 2 he says aloud. I just want to sit down with him, grab a cup of tea or something, sit in a dark, quiet corner and just talk about life. I think I'd have some really fascinating discussions with him. A lot of the same can be said for Mio. She's a very contemplative character who can keep a lot to herself at times. Obviously, with her death mere months away, she has a fair bit of pressure on her, which I think entitles her to a wee bit of existential panic every now and then. What really stood out to me was how strong she was in spite of that. Out of everyone, she really feels like the group anchor, the one grounding everyone else. Not necessarily because she's the most charismatic or the one making most of the big decisions, but because she feels the most down to earth, I guess. Every member of Ouroboros is essential, but I get the feeling the group would fall apart the quickest had Mio not been there. She's adaptive, perceptive, intelligent, enough that it becomes easy to rely on her. Easy to forget that she's got all these worries bubbling under the surface. Like Noah and every character really, she keeps it together, but it's obvious just how much is weighing her down. And seeing her struggle to come to terms with her limited mortality and how she can use it to carve a place and legacy in this world are compelling. Noah and Mio are, through one way or another, the most important characters narratively, and their relationship becomes especially significant throughout the second half of the game. However, they are far from the only characters, and what Xenoblade 3 does really well is balance the amount of screen time all its main party members get. Again, aided by the fact that you have all 6 of them once the opening act is done, with all of them staying relevant throughout the game. Yunie's a fucking lad, I absolutely adore her. She's snarky, dry, cool, foul, just an absolutely chaotic treat, especially next to Taion, who we'll get to shortly. Long story short, she's an absolute joy to watch anytime she's on screen, but her outwardly abrasive traits, like everyone else, are far from all she is. Yunie's always looking for that next bit of banter, but it's really just a sign of how much she cares for her mates, Noah, Lance, and eventually the Agnes lot too. And when she wants to, she's absolutely capable of dropping the silliness and being really sincere when the time calls for it. She's actually pretty emotionally intelligent, not that you would get that at first. Like Noah and Mio, I think her attitude is a little bit of a defense mechanism, especially once she begins to process the reincarnation cycle of Ionios and her own place in it. Not saying anything's wrong about it, that's just how she deals with the world's bullshit, and who am I to begrudge her? Makes her a fucking treat to watch, let me tell you, especially when you pair her up with my man Taion. Even disregarding the fact that I look like him and sound like him and maybe kind of act like him too, Taion is great. He's the obligatory smart guy skeptic, taking the longest to warm up to everyone else, having only met even Mio and Senna not long before the start of the game, and his more frosty demeanour makes him great to bounce off some of the more boisterous members of the group. It also, of course, makes it even more rewarding to see him come to warm up to everyone else in the group, especially after the incident with Colony Lambda and dealing with his lingering hang-ups over his mentors. Being the resident smart-ass intellectual, he also hogs quite a few of the early game's most interesting moments when it comes to discussing the game's themes and philosophy, and whenever he and Noah share a conversation, it's always a treat. Lance at first seemed like he was going to be a bit of a Ryan copycat, in the same way I was worried that Noah was just going to be another Shulk, but he actually doesn't really have a lot in common with Ryan. The only things being, he's buff, kind of meat-headed, and protective over his best man. One thing that stood out to me early on was how almost stern Lance felt at times. He isn't a stick in the mud like Taion, he's always down for some bants. In fact, he's probably the only one who can match Yunie's tongue. But, aside from Taion, Lance is the one most resistant to change early on. He puts a lot of stock into the role he's been assigned. It's his way of coping after the death of Yorin, the only way he feels he has any worth now. Lance was probably the character who surprised me the most in terms of his depth. He's far more contemplative than he might initially appear. He might look a bit thick, but there's definitely more than meets the eye. Senna was actually my favourite Ouroboros member during this first half of the game. She's just this ungodly adorable munchkin with like 3 brain cells, half of which she shares with Lance. She's by far the most innocent one of the group, not counting the Nopon. Like, I'm thinking about it now, and I just don't think she's capable of any malicious thoughts, partially because she has no thoughts in the first place. I exaggerate, of course. Senna, like all the others, has plenty under the surface, and similar to Lance, she struggles a lot with her self-image. Specifically, she doesn't really know who she is and what makes her strong and special as a person, which is why she has a habit of copying other people's phrases and is so attached to Mio. Mio is literally a part of her identity, which is why she and Lance are so willing to throw themselves in harm's way for their friends. Because without their friends, they're nothing. I was generally underwhelmed by a lot of the first game's party members, but found they still worked well enough as a group. Xenoblade 2 in my opinion had much stronger characters, and I liked their dynamic together, especially in the early game. However, it was hard not to feel that by the end, some of them were just kind of along for the ride. Xenoblade 3 is the best of both worlds. A tight-knit group of characters that are great in isolation, but together really bring the best of each other out. I could also go off a ton about the heroes who fill out your 7th party slot, but there's 17 of them, I'd be here forever. I'll just say that they're all also really great, and it was really cool that I was able to find all of them by diegetically wandering around, with the exception of Sagiri, who's at the end of a long side quest chain, and I had to look her up. Talking about the actual gameplay, this is where you can really feel everything Monolith Soft has learnt over the past decade come together. In terms of gameplay, Xenoblade 3 is absolutely the culmination of all its predecessors, 1, 2 and X, not just in terms of actual gameplay mechanics, but also technically as well. Everything is just so seamless now, from cutscenes transitioning into battles rather than there being a loading screen, to being able to fight in water, which caught me so off guard when I first did it in the game's opening hours. It was incredible. Again, actual gameplay talk. Part of building off of and incorporating so much from previous games means that this game's combat feels the most complex on a base level, at least. Generally, it feels most like an evolution of 2's, especially presentation-wise, with you having 3 arts plus a talent art with you being unable to perform auto attacks unless you're still. Rather than having everything feed into each other, however, with one level of arts fueling the next, everything's slightly more segmented, similar to how it was in 1 and X. Arts unique to Agnian classes can be charged to auto attacks, but ones from Kevesi classes charge over time, with talent arts charging depending on said class's role. Attackers charge with stuff like critical hits, defenders by drawing aggro, healers by healing, you get the idea. One major innovation this game introduces, which was kind of foreshadowed in Torna, is the ability to switch between party members at any time during gameplay, including during combat. This is one of my favourite new features, since it not only has gameplay benefits, allowing you to say, quickly switch to a healer to make sure a tank or attacker gets healed or revived sooner, but I also found it encouraged me to play as all party members and not get comfortable with just one. In Xenoblade 1, I mostly stuck with Shulk, since I didn't really feel comfortable not having Monado arts, though I did start to experiment a little bit in the endgame. In X, there's no real point in playing as anyone other than the Avatar, since they're a blank slate who you can just build into any role you need. The other characters do have unique arts, but you can learn those too by clearing their affinity missions. It's actually not too dissimilar to 2's Blade system, though I feel that was still built around playing as one driver. Here I was always swapping between characters, changing their classes to shake up the team composition. Just this one simple change really encouraged me to try experimenting more. Cancelling is back, though you don't unlock art-to-art cancelling until you recruit Juniper, which, after 5 years of abusing it in 2, really took me a while to get used to. Once I did unlock it though, it really improved the flow of combat. I should also mention as well that I played the game mostly on hard mode. I selected it at the start of the game and ran with that all the way until around the time I got to Y in Origin. Mostly because I really wanted to beat the game that night. I mention this because I think it affected how I used the Ouroboros transformations and chain attacks, mostly as ways to avoid certain death and to get in some free heals. It wasn't until the post game that I really started to mess around with them and appreciate what they had to offer. Comparing it to previous battle systems, it's hard to measure how it stacks up. It isn't airtight, and it doesn't quite replicate the satisfying rhythm of 2 or the all-out madness of X, but it also adds so many quality of life improvements like swapping party members mid-combat and dashing that make it hard to go back to those prior games. I think in order to properly compare all of them, I'd have to replay all the games, which, I mean, if you want to pay me to do that, my Patreon is in the description. Overall, it was fun to learn and master, and ultimately, that's all I asked for in a Xenoblade battle system. Outside of combat, exploring the world of Ionios was a blast. It's incredible how large yet dense Monolith was able to make this game. I think it might actually have the largest areas in the numbered games, but there's a lot of lovely little environment details that just make wandering around a pleasure. The random fights between creatures and soldiers, the fact that your clothes get dirty the more you run, the way the party runs. Instead of just following you in a triangle, they'll run with you, sometimes overtaking you, sometimes they'll see something and run over to it. It actually reminds me a lot of Final Fantasy 15, a game I also just enjoy kind of running around in. They both even have camps where you can level up, eat food for status buffs, as well as just watch the group chill out and stuff. Another big part of what makes exploration in this game so good are the side quests. This game easily has the best side quests in the trilogy. This also includes stuff like the optional hero quests, but even the regular side quests are good. I'm far from finished with all of them, but I particularly enjoyed the quests related to Colonies 0, 9, 11, Gamma, and Iota. Like I said, I've still got plenty to see, but I'm always learning something new that enriches my knowledge of the world or feeds into the game's themes really well, so it's a mountain of content I'm happy to climb. I can't really say anything about the music that hasn't already been said about every other game in the franchise. It's fucking phenomenal, what else do you want? So I'll just share some of my favourite tracks, which include Aegis Wilderness, Night, the Mobius battle themes, the pause menu theme, Iris Network, the ending theme, Where We Belong, and the unique monster theme, You Will Know Our Names finale, specifically the climax version that plays when a unique monster's health bar drops below a certain point. On that point, I want to mention just how cool the dynamic songs are in this game, especially the unique monster and Mobius battle themes, both of which have different versions they shift into as the enemy's health gets lower and lower. It's super fucking extra, but I love it. On the subject of Mobius, I want to talk about the game's villains very briefly, who, aside from N and M, are generally one of the more contentious elements of the game. I discussed why I thought Zed and the Consuls were great villains in my thematic analysis of Xenoblade 3 last year, as well as the one I did about Future Redeemed this year. I will just reiterate that while I understand people not being as invested in them as the more personable antagonists of 2, I really think that they're the perfect villains for this world and this story. In fact, I genuinely believe that the overall story would suffer were they made more in the vein of Torna. I know I'll probably get a lot of mud thrown my way for this, but I really found Zed in particular to be a compelling main antagonist. Throughout most of the game, there's this intense mystery surrounding him and what he is, though that might partially have been fear that he would be revealed to be Zanza or something. And when his true nature is revealed, just the implications of his mere existence impact and inform the game's themes and messages so much it's fascinating to think about, all tied together by a fantastic performance by Harry Lloyd. He injects this quiet, soft-spoken menace into Zed that I just absolutely go crazy for. And his presence during the final boss is just... Okay, calm down. Let's save that for the formal retrospective, whenever that comes, because that's going to be a whole thing unto itself. I will say I wish more emphasis had been placed on certain other Mobius, especially Y and X. I think Y could have had more screen time, but as things stand, it's fine. I think side story Mio has enough of him to get the point across. X, though, gets done a bit dirty. I actually got her confused with Consul H from Side Story Lands, not helped by the fact that I didn't do Side Stories Uni or Senna, which means she also didn't show up in Origin. Why you wouldn't have her show up regardless is bizarre to me, and it's made even worse by the fact that she's by far the most attractive character in the game and you barely get to see her, and I think this is another case where I should probably cut myself off. Point being, though I understand why not everyone is a fan of them, I think Mobius are the perfect villains for this game, and I really appreciate the part they play. There's a lot I want to talk about, but I really want to get this out by the 29th, so I think I'll bring things to a close for now by talking about a cutscene. It's around the midpoint of Chapter 4, as the party are making their way through Macathor Wildwood, and it's called Ever Dwindling Time. The party are just about to arrive at Keves Castle and decide to finish the final leg in the morning. As she and Lance wash up after dinner, the dishes slip through Mio's hands, momentarily losing feeling in her fingers. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, and later, Mio recluses herself, once more faced with the reality that in just 2 months, she'll die. Oblivious to her turmoil, Noah arrives to tell her they should do one final weapons check, but she's past the point of pretending things are okay, expressing her frustration at the slow pace the group is taking, Keves Castle being yet another divergence on their road to Sword March. Noah tries to reassure her with reason. They have to help the people in the castle, and it will make their journey in the long run easier. Besides, she still has 2 months left, but this is what pushes her over. She doesn't still have 2 months left. She only has 2 months left. Caught off guard by the outburst, Noah reminds her that she agreed to the plan and tries to de-escalate, saying that he understands why she's upset and that they should just take it easy for a moment. Obviously, this wasn't the right thing to say, and Mio runs off, tears in her eyes. Senna then approaches Noah, lightly admonishing him for his obliviousness. Mio, for as put together as she seems, is still human, still terrified of dying, and she needs someone who can tell her it's gonna be okay, and that someone has to be Noah. Senna somewhat dejectedly noting that he's the only one she really talks to about this stuff. She reassures him that she really just needed to get her fears off her chest and vent a little, telling Noah to get his apology ready for tomorrow before going after her. Watching with amusement from the other side of the camp, Lance and Tyon are both thankful to be distant from the drama tonight, though they both affirm to each other their commitment to get to the city, for Mio's sake, if nothing else. Lance, pleased with this development in their friendship, tries to give him a high five, but Tyon, ever the tsundere, turns his nose up, though Lance doesn't seem to mind. The next morning, as the group is getting ready to set out, Mio seeks out Noah. She apologizes for snapping at him, and he apologizes for not appreciating the stress she's under. Mio looks at him, a mix of affection and melancholy on her face before she shows him her Offseer flute, explaining that she got it from a friend, Miyabi. Noah notes that Agni and Offseers do work in pairs, and Mio tells him of her surprise and gratitude when he joined in and helped her send off Guernica Vandam, back when they first met. She tells him that Miyabi told her to keep on living life in her stead, something that breaks her heart, as she was actually older than Miyabi when she died. Noah finally connects the dots, realizing that Miyabi was the girl he would see in Mio's memories whenever they interlink. Wiping her tears, Mio asks if they can swap flutes, wanting Miyabi's to go on being used a little bit longer, even after she's gone. Noah agrees, and the conversation... I had something written here, but now that I'm thinking about it, I think I'm just going to let the game speak for itself.
Mio. I get it. All right, it's a trade. You should know. Mine's seen better days too.
Don't worry. I don't really mind either.
Thank you for the chat. I'm kind of surprised.
Surprised?
Even after interlinking, there's still things I don't know about you.
Well, of course. How can you when there are things I don't understand myself? You're not going to pick up on everything.
Gotta put it into words first.
Yeah, but it doesn't always work, even then.
Like last night.
Oh, that. That was me being selfish. But now, I feel like we're starting to get on the same wavelength.
Maybe interlinking just helped that along. To bring us a little closer together.
Maybe, yeah. That might just be it.
This cutscene is my favourite cutscene in the entire Xenoblade franchise. It was the moment I realised I had fallen in love with Noah and Mio, the moment I started to see them fall in love with each other, and the moment I realised that Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was no longer my favourite game of all time. It's moments like these that I live for, that I'm always hoping to find, both in the fiction I consume and the life that I live. These moments I can only describe as a deep satisfaction, a firm knowledge that in this one instance, everything is just right, perfect, good. I live for moments like these. I'm not ashamed to admit that they've saved my life. No matter how bad things get, no matter how much I want it all to just stop, to end, I have to keep going. I have to keep fighting through the pain. How could I ever give up when that next amazing moment might just be around the corner?